Are you trying to figure out how to deal with your anxiety? Hi there, and welcome back to Ask Dr. Syra, the show where I answer your questions about mental health, personal growth, and relationships. Today's question comes from Jay. It's a really simple question with a really kind of detailed answer. So the question is, what is the best way to deal with anxiety? Very simple. What is the best way to deal with anxiety? So if you're asking that question, Jay, I'm hoping that you're not only getting your answer here, that you're also hopefully working with a professional. Maybe you're in a support group. If anxiety is a real issue for you or you have an anxiety disorder, then hopefully you're getting that professional support. You may be on medication. So this is not therapy. This is not medical advice. These are just some tips and ideas around how a person might deal with anxiety. And there's no best way. There's some ways. There's some different, like it's like a menu, right? And you can decide from the menu what sounds good or feels good to you. There's some that are more effective than others for some people, others that are more effective for other people. So there's no best, but there are some different ones. So I wanted to split them up into kind of three different categories. So the first is like the physical actions that you could take around your body. The second is the mental and emotional responses. And then finally, there's some techniques that you might want to engage in. So the body, the mental, emotional, and the techniques. So let's begin with the body. There's certain things that when they're going well, just help with mental health overall. And often with anxiety, these things aren't, or they're affected in some way. And so it can be hard when these things are off balance. But there's three in particular. So sleep, what you eat, and your movement. Sleep, food, and movement. For anxiety, those are really, really, really critical. It's scaffolding, right? It's the foundation. And if you don't have those three things well, like doing well, then it's really, really hard to manage anxiety. And actually, when those things, when, say, for example, if you're not sleeping well, that can actually create more anxiety because you're not sleeping well. So, getting those three things on track first, I think, is wise. So, looking at your sleep, how can you practice sleep hygiene? So, sleep hygiene is things like, disengaging from screens at least an hour before bed, if that's a possibility. If it's not a possibility, then ensuring that you're not in bed with a screen, right? So you're not watching TV in bed or you're not on your phone in bed. But you're once you're in your bed, you're not engaging with the screen. So that's one. Another thing with sleep hygiene is having like a cool bedroom, like cooler than normal, helps you sleep better. Doing some gratitude journaling or something before bed, kind of getting into that right frame of mind, or listening to, some music that you like, just anything to kind of quiet the mind in the evenings. Um, Going to bed consistently the same time every night, even on weekends, that's also another element of sleep hygiene. And waking up the same time every day, that helps with that regular rhythm and routine of sleep. So sleep, super important. Then there's movement. If you're the more you move and the more you move vigorously, the better it is for your body and your mind. Um, Vigorous physical exercise actually eats up all the stress hormones in our body. And so our baseline is just better when we're moving more, and we're moving frequently. So that, and I'm not going to use the word exercise because to me that evokes like the gym or like a marathon. And I'm not asking you to do that. I'm just saying get moving, move your body. You can be running up and down your flights of stairs. You could be dancing around the house. You could be going for a regular walk, just something where you're moving regularly. And then there's what you're eating. Man, there's certain foods that are going to spike you and then crash you. Anything with sugar in it, for example, or caffeine in it is going to spike you and then crash you. And so making sure that the foods that you're choosing are anxiety-friendly foods. So you want to avoid caffeine because it gives you the jitters. You want to avoid sugar because it gives you that sugar rush. And not to say you can never have a coffee or like, a ice cream bar, but just to minimize, like when you're in high anxiety, trying to minimize the consumption of those things. Also, there's mixed research on it, but from anecdotally, it seems like people who smoke weed and have an anxiety issue, that in the long term, that can actually increase your anxiety levels. If you're regularly using the weed to cope, it actually, in the long term, your brain just adjusts and you don't feel calm, and it increases anxiety. So alcohol, cannabis, other drugs, to minimize your use, because they might feel good in the moment. They often do. But as far as what it's doing to your brain for the long term and your psychology for the long term, it's not going to be helpful. So sleep, exercise, diet. And then the fourth one I would add to this section is therapy. Like having regular sessions with your therapist when your anxiety is high is super, super, super helpful, because you'll get tools and techniques, and there's different therapies that work really well with anxiety. For example, cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy can work well for some anxiety conditions. Narrative therapy can be really good for anxiety. So there's these different modalities that are actually really helpful for those living with anxiety. So sleep, exercise, diet, and therapy. And then, so the next section is around the mental and emotional piece. So therapy kind of addresses that too, but this is more about your own inner process. Like the first part of it would be learning to identify your triggers, right? Are there certain times of the day that you're more anxious? Are there certain events or situations that bring up anxiety? Are there certain people who, when you're around them, you find yourself heightened? Identifying what those triggers are. And so when you know your triggers in advance, then you can prepare yourself if you're having to have those kinds of encounters. Don't avoid those encounters completely, because then you'll never actually move through. Because often when we have anxiety, the instinct is to just do anything that will not cause me to be anxious, but that actually doesn't help heal the issue. It just makes you, it shrinks your world, right? So it's not about avoiding those things, but it's about knowing that it's a trigger, and then being ready and having like a strategy for when you have to address or interact with those people or places. And the other piece around mental and emotional is group support. Anxiety disorders can be so isolating, and it can feel like you're just the only crazy one who's like worried all the time and stressed all the time. So being around others who have a similar challenge can be really, really, really supportive, really supportive. And so look into that, and that would be another area I would recommend for help. And then the techniques, and this is something again that I'd encourage you to talk, if you're seeing a therapist, Jay, to see your therapist about this, but there's some different techniques you can use. So there's relaxation techniques that you can learn. There's breathing techniques you can learn. Certain meditations can be really helpful for people who are living with anxiety. HeartMath is another kind of tool that's helpful for people with anxiety. So looking into tools and techniques, but I would say again, to do that with a guide. Don't just like go online and Google it and try stuff. It's helpful to have a guide, because there's a lot of content out there, and not all of it is informed by the evidence. Some of it's just like somebody's good idea that may or may not be actually helpful. So making sure that you're working through this with somebody, maybe somebody who has, who lives with anxiety themselves and has found some certain things helpful, or maybe a professional, whatever level of support you need. So those are my thoughts about some of the ways to deal with anxiety. I don't know if there's a best, but if you put together, the physical body stuff, sleep, movement, food, and therapy, the triggers in the support group for emotional, mental, and then these different techniques, relaxation, breathing, mindfulness, these might be helpful. So hopefully that information was helpful, and you have a place to start now as you do your investigation into how to support yourself with the experience of anxiety. And check out the channel. There's other interesting posts or videos around here on the topic of anxiety and other topics. So check them out, and I will see you next time. Bye.